Hello, friends. Today is the first part of a two-part presentation on the story of Chanukah for adults. The word Chanukah means dedication. Because of the climax of the historical moment of Chanukah is the dedication, or actually rededication, of the temple in ancient Jerusalem following a military victory by the Judeans over an occupying force of Syrian Greeks around the year 166 before the Common Era. Chanukah is perhaps the most enigmatic of all Jewish holidays because there was so much confusion about the actual history and the mythic sacred stories that have become connected to and a vital part of how it is taught and celebrated. Before I speak a little bit about the history, I need to say that every Jewish holiday has some blending of historical elements and mythic dimensions. Now, when I use the word myth, I don't mean fairy tale or made-up story. Myth is in its sociological definition, is a story that imparts sacred meaning. So, a few historical notes. When the Jewish Bible was codified, that is, edited into its final form, the form we know today, probably sometime around the beginning of the Common Era, the two ancient texts called the Book of Maccabees were not included in the Jewish biblical canon. The only reason they survived is that when the Christian canon was formed several centuries later, these two books were included. Ironically, the oldest recorded writings about the events of Chanukah were intentionally overlooked by the Jews and saved by the early Christians. So, here's a little historical context for the events that the Jewish people celebrate on Chanukah. To understand Chanukah, you have to remember that Alexander the Great, who lived in the 4th century before the Common Era, created one of the great empires of the ancient world and was responsible for the spread of Greek culture and philosophy through most of what was then considered the Western world. Hellenistic civilization represents a fusion of the ancient Greek world with that of the Near East, Middle East, and Southwest Asia. Hellenistic Greek became the lingua franca, the recognized spoken language throughout the Hellenistic world. Greek music, art, sport dominated the Western world. Hellenistic culture represented an enlightened worldview considered by many to be the way of the future. Nations that shut themselves off and did not confront the challenge of Hellenistic culture were falling by the wayside. Now, Alexander had brought a radical economic revolution with the minting of coins. This radically transformed the marketplace, which had been dominated by the barter system since the dawn of civilization. There was a great flow of population into cities, and many people left farming economies and shifted to crafts and trades. You could buy oil in the marketplace, and more people had light after dark because of the oil. The concept of leisure time extended beyond the aristocracy for the first time in all of history. Greek baths, theater, athletic events were all very exciting cultural innovations throughout the Hellenistic world. In fact, I would say that there is an analogy between the spread of Greek culture then and the spread of American culture around the world today. This was more powerfully felt and accepted by people who had money and power than people who lived in remote villages and remained more connected to their traditional cultures. The aristocratic elites who embraced Hellenistic culture gained access to the social and economic benefits flowing to citizens of a Greek city-state, including the right to mint coins, to take part in international Hellenistic events, and to receive protection from the city's founding ruler. When Alexander died in 323 before the Common Era, his empire was split up into 4 separate kingdoms. Ancient Israel was sort of caught between the Greek dynasty of 2 of Alexander's generals, Ptolemy, who controlled Egypt to the southwest, and the Seleucid Greek dynasty in Syria and Mesopotamia to the north and northeast. So where was ancient Israel located geographically relative to these 2 great empires? Right smack dab in the middle. Around 200 before the Common Era, the Syrian Greeks, up in the north and northeast, had gotten the upper hand and controlled ancient Israel, or Judea. Because Hellenistic culture was viewed as the wave of the future, the pressure to acculturate, to assimilate, was quite intense in Judea. Therefore, the people of Judea had to decide whether the universalistic focus of Hellenism constituted a danger to their ancestral religion and its God, or whether it simply represented a more modern and progressive way of life that could be merged with Jewish practice. Judaism, like every ancient religion and practice, was deeply affected by Hellenistic culture. While these changes were occurring, there were those who felt threatened by these reforms and resisted them. The ancient Near East was certainly a part of the Hellenistic world, but what was in question was how much were people willing to become assimilated, and to what extent were they willing to sacrifice their ancestral culture, values, and religion. Chanukah is really about a struggle for religious and cultural identity. And the struggle was at its core between a powerful political and religious elite that was more comfortable assimilating into Hellenistic culture and a group of traditionalists that resisted it. The Maccabees were a family that led the revolt against the assimilationists and their Syrian Greek supporters and benefactors. The Jewish religion, from their perspective, the perspective of the Maccabees, was being co-opted, and the temple in Jerusalem was being turned into a more modern Hellenistic temple. There was tremendous pressure to abandon central Jewish traditions, including keeping kosher, Jewish dietary consciousness, and the sacredness of the dinner table, the centrality of Shabbat, the Sabbath as a time of renewal and spiritual regeneration, and circumcision as a sign of the covenant with God. This family, this clan, the Maccabees, led a revolutionary to free the country from domination by a foreign power, and this guerrilla warfare lasted about 3 years. But there was a greater struggle going on, and that was between honoring traditional religious values and not simply abandoning a rich spiritual heritage, even as the world was changing irrevocably. Next week, I will talk more about the Maccabees and finish the story of Chanukah for adults. Stay safe and be well. Shalom uvracha, peace and blessings.